And so I'm having this experience, and I'm, finding myself, I'm on this table, and, there are these grays around me, and, they're working on my body and they're scanning me. And then all of a sudden, this gigantic praying mantis, like, comes up from the foot of, like, from down by my feet. And I'm like, what on, is that a what on earth? And
I love birds, but I still do, and I watch them all the time. But never saw a cardinal because I lived in San Francisco. We didn't have them, but I remember cutting it out and putting it on my wall. And I'm wondering right now,
oh my goodness.
I'm remembering right now, how many other people that are going to watch this, how many others knew that or experienced that? And I don't think I need to ask the question how Spielberg would know about that, but I think he did. Welcome back to Breaking the Silence Project. And this is In Conversation With, and this is where we have a conversation with someone who has these experiences or is in the field. And we just have an open conversation between us about all this stuff. And today we have Courtney Buterbaugh. Is that right?
Buterbaugh.
Buterbaugh. So it's not like butter. It's
Buterbaugh.
Buterbaugh. Okay, I knew I'd messed that up. I please accept my apologies on that. So
That's
it's
okay.
it's not like Smith or something like that. So or my
I
name
was going to
Neil.
say, I was going to say, yeah, if I'd expected an easy ride, I would have just gone with Smith. And
Yeah. We first became aware of you. Well, actually, I first became aware of you because Mary read me an article. Um, I think it was we were all No, it wasn't. It was the problem with female experiencer. The problem of the female experiencer, um, which speaks about patriarchy and how women who are experiencers have been treated by the media and by men in general, especially MUFON. And I really wanted to be able to talk to you about that because I was so taken by the article, and thought it was so important because it's so true. You've written another article too, which we'll get to later, and also you are an experiencer yourself. So who better to write about this subject than a woman who's an experiencer and knows how women have been treated? Not all, but most of them, in my opinion. And that show on Netflix, the Manhattan Abduction, was just well, actually, it was a good example of what we're talking about, and a very terrible, terrible uh, show about Linda's experience. So, welcome to the show.
thank you. Thank you for having
Yeah,
me. It's wonderful to be here. This is a subject I love to talk about, and I agree with you that it's really important, um, as we're sort of at this juncture now of, as disclosure rules forward, and we're really at a place where we're going to have to decide who speaks for experiencers, and people are lining up to take over that role, and most of them aren't experiencers, and almost none of them are women. So I feel like it's really important for us to stand up at this point in time and say, okay, going forward, we need experiencers, and experiencers are always the elephant in the room. We're always
yes,
the uncomfortable person that nobody wants to acknowledge, nobody wants to talk to us or about us because our stories are awkward. sometimes and
Awkward.
uncomfortable
Yeah.
because it doesn't let, they don't neatly sit in a box and you can't frame whatever narrative you want to push with experiencer stories because we just don't fit neatly into any of those boxes, and it's too we're too awkward, and so all of the people just want to ignore us when they're wanting to talk about, the nuts and bolts side of UFOs or the
Yeah.
political side of disclosure or all of these things that that tend to get the spotlight, which is not, as I said, not experiencers.
And we won't mention any names because that's never a good thing. But I think many of us know who we're talking about. Because the last time I mentioned names, I've got two nasty letters from two people very high up in the food chain in this subject matter who are quote unquote big UFO stars, who really took offense to my questioning their true intentions.
Yeah, and I honor all of the whistleblowers and all of the people that are coming forward. And I think there's room for everybody at the table.
Yeah.
And I think that everybody has something very valuable to say. And I'm certainly not denigrating anybody's voice, but I'm certainly advocating that ours be included because I feel like it's past time for experiencers to get a seat at the table.
So, so because a lot of our audience, a lot of any audiences this day, um, either don't have time to read or don't read or both, or always have an excuse about it, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Um, bring us up to speed, starting with the problem of the female experiencer, because that I would like to hear it in your words. Uh, what prompted you to write the article? I think that's kind of a dumb question, but that's a good starting point.
Yeah, it is a good start. And I think it did grow out of, like I said, this, increasing energy that's being put toward disclosure and how many of us experiencers and specifically female experiencers are feeling left out of that. And I think one of the really triggering events was when Neil deGrasse Tyson, I saw an interview with him where he was, after he has spent all of this time, years and years and years, putting experiencers down, UFO people down. Now he's sort of trying to position himself, it seems, as one of these people that's now going to come forward and attempt to tell the UFO story or the experiencer story. And I have a group of wonderful other female writers that are on. We're all on Substack,
Hmm.
and we talk, kind of behind the scenes about. And it was something that really exercised all of us. We were like, this is terrible. This is really, you know, made us angry and upset that not only is there somebody that is trying to, pivot at this minute after, putting us down for so long and now saying, okay, now I'm going to be the arbiter of the story. I'm going to be the narrator of the experiencer story. And that was really what it grew out of.
Oh.
Um, and particularly, um, because I think it really disappointed me too on some level because, Tyson is obviously the sort of the mantle bearer of Carl Sagan, who I know I certainly grew up with Cosmos, and that was a huge formative experience for me. I was 7 years old when it came out, and it just, it fueled part of my lifelong love of astronomy and the stars, and obviously fed
Yes.
really it feeds intimately into my history as an experiencer, and so it was just sort of salt in a wound to say, okay, now here's this person that's sort of taken over the mantle for Sagan, and I really don't want him, taking over, to now have this position where he's saying, okay, after mocking you, I'm now going to tell your story.
Yeah,
Um,
he did not learn from Carl Sagan, who welcomed him into his life with his open arms when Tyson was a young kid, basically. He didn't learn the most valuable thing he could have learned from Carl Sagan, and that was kindness.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, it was shocking to me, and I'm like, "Oh, no," and yet my Substack, other writers, we were talking about that was the genesis of this, to really sit down and say, "Okay, who gets to speak for experiencers?" And then because it was primarily a group of women talking, then, that obviously I took the tack of, okay, well, specifically for women, because experiencer voices have been minimized and silenced, but within that, particularly women. And so I wrote the article sort of as a way to kind of to try and unpack that, provide some examples. Um, and I'm an art historian by education, and so I couldn't resist sort of taking a little bit of a historical investigation to say, okay, how how do experiencer stories sort of fit in this larger cultural narrative of stories? So I talked a little bit about the how experiencer narrative sort of grew out of this narrative tradition that began with frontier narratives, of captivity narratives of people that had been abducted by Indians on the frontier, by Native Americans,
Hmm.
and
Wow.
and I use that as an example to sort of then begin talking about it how we have this history of telling these stories, but there's always an agenda behind these stories. With the frontier narratives, it was always this agenda. You started out having um, there was a moralistic intent behind these, and typically it was women were the focus of this moralistic intent. There were both male and female subjects of these captivity
Yeah.
narratives,
Yes,
but
there
when the
was.
subject was a but when the subject was a male, they tended to want to focus on the male resourcefulness, um, how the male could outsmart the captors, how the male could draw on wilderness wisdom and and could survive, could escape. Whereas the women, it tended to become about a it was yeah, they took it from a moralistic standpoint to say that this woman's story, it's not about her strength. She is a proxy for a larger narrative. And whether that was the religious narrative, whether that was a narrative about manifest destiny, or whatever the the captivity narrative grew into, the female's story was never about power. It was never about her. It was always about her function as a proxy for
Hmm.
some other narrative. And you can trace that right through from the captivity narratives. Then as those go, they sort of fell out of fashion toward the end of the Victorian period. um, but then we kind of you can see how that goes right then into the era of the experiencer narrative. you
Yes.
can you can definitely
Yes.
trace those threads from the captivity narratives to the experiencer narratives. And so I wanted to really draw out those. I wanted to really create some good examples of those, and to say that um, uh, I'm sorry. I know you can edit this out, but I'm trying to.
No, I don't need to.
I'm trying to.
You're collecting your thoughts, and I know that Linda's story and what happened with Netflix is a really good example of what you're building towards.
Sure, sure. So I think in the article I talked about the aspect of the captivity narratives, but it goes deeper than that. And I think what I wanted to say was you can go even further back in time, because women's narratives became bound up with narratives of female sexual trauma,
Mm,
because when you had these captivity narratives, there was eventually, over the course of the 19th century, there was a shift between these nonfiction, the male captivity stories, and then the female captivity stories, and these trends persisted into the 20th century when we began, as I said, to tell the story of the alien abduction scenario. And, men could be disempowered by these narratives, the slave narratives, but they always maintained the possibility of redemption through philosophy, and they always maintained agency through, as I said, through technological innovation. They could think their way out of these situations. But, women had none of this possibility. If their stories were told at all, they were told by men, and they were cast as these sexualized encounters,
mhm,
because there was always this aspect of rape was built in there. It was subjugation, and you see this drawn right directly into these abduction narratives. You have these same themes play out. Male UFO abduction experiences trade on sci-fi frameworks of strength and courage. Whereas, so you could have a man that was disempowered by, say, an abduction scenario, but
mm,
they still have this possibility of agency
right.
through technological innovation, and this sort of righteous vengeance. Whereas female abductees in the alien scenario, they have none of this possibility. If their stories are told at all, they're cast in these sexualized frames that emphasize the gynecological horror. They're subject to genetic engineering and hybridization programs, which males and females are parts of these programs, but male involvement is fairly clinically limited to sperm extraction,
Mhm.
and sometimes these eroticized sexual encounters with female aliens. Whereas females, there are these very clinical, detailed, um, just invasive types of things that are told in these narratives that bring up, all of these ghosts of the sexual dysfunction, bodily shame, and those are never features of male abduction scenarios. So there's definitely a double standard
There is,
there.
and
um,
Whitley was a rare exception in that.
yes. Yeah, and these modern abductee narratives, they are gendered just as these captivity narratives were gendered. Um, Again, where stories of male victims typically communicate messages of strength, canniness, and skill, whereas the ones about women focus more um, it, on suffering. Like I said, gynecological horror, terror, prurient male voyeurism. And again, there's always this aspect of the body sort of as a moralizing canvas.
And mainstream
Um,
media just loves to cash in on it.
yeah,
They
absolutely.
they don't care about you one bit, they only care about how many people they can get to watch their program, so if they fit in all those aspects of the things you're talking about, and that becomes what they use in their advertising, people, in my opinion, statistically, are drawn to watch that,
Yes,
and they
absolutely.
know it, and they know it, and it's just wrong.
Yeah, and it's just it fits into this larger cultural tendency to not believe women in general. Whether it is, women's accounts of sexual assault, or whether it's
It's true.
women's how women are not taken seriously by the medical community. And that's, as someone who has suffered from a lot of health problems, this is something that I really have a lot of, firsthand experience with, is how belittled women are in a medical environment, because we are not seen, contrary to men, as capable historians of our own bodily story.
That's right. And
And
the current administration is a very good example of the blatant abuse of that.
mhm,
There's
yeah,
so many women that have come forward about the famous files and the guy and the occupant of the White House, as I call him now. There's been so much evidence to support that these women are telling the truth, and it's
yeah,
still it goes on. They're ignored. I mean, it's like they're making it up or something, and it's terrible.
yes, absolutely.
So this directly applies to people who or women who come forward and say that they've had these experiences, especially the ones that's been very terrifying for. And I find with all of us, the very early beginnings of our experience or our awareness of the experience is a very scary thing. Um, Many of us will evolve through time with a different understanding of what's happening to us, but initially, um, it's pretty traumatizing and um,
Yeah, and there's yes, absolutely. And there's so much at stake in speaking up in general. And women tend to pay a much higher price for speaking up than men do. Because, like I said, in medicine, there's this just fundamental unwillingness to believe women. Um, and I think, part of the reason, I wonder, that this has cast such a long shadow over experiencer narratives is because so much of the early advocates for experiencers, and the earliest narrators of experiencer stories came through the world of psychiatry.
mhm,
And we can go back to, obviously John Mack, um,
yes.
one of the early
Da
giants.
David Jacobs,
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, and so that is sort of the original lens that
right.
these stories began to be shared with the public, was through this lens of psychiatry, which has all of the prejudices of the medical field. And although Mac certainly was always very he I mean, he truly believed, he was very supportive of experiencers, but there was, he fought a difficult battle against, Harvard, who was, his own institution.
Yeah,
um yeah, and people
and
that
then it
came
cost him
after
his
him
life.
at Harvard. Mhm. It cost him, yeah, it almost cost him his career, his life. And there were people that came after him, even at Harvard, who seem to almost make a point of undoing the good that Mac had done, because
Yeah,
they wanted to go right back to this. Oh, well, women are not great, but I mean, really, have you heard these crazy experiencers? These people are crazy. um, I talk in my article about Richard McNally and Susan Clancy,
mhm,
who were at Harvard, um, and they shared an overlap with their careers overlap sort of the end of Mac's years at Harvard. And they came to deal with the alien abduction phenomenon, as it is known, not because that's what they set out to study, but they were exploring the idea of recovered memories, and they needed a control group so that you could have a group of people that we could be absolutely sure are are that their memories are false, and they decided to work to use experiencers, alien abductees as their
Sure.
control group, um, because surely these people are not, again, not reliable narrators of their own story.
Hmm.
And so we see that same prejudice just continuing again and
Oh,
again,
yeah.
is brought back into the story.
Yeah. You and I have both been told so many times we don't know what we're talking about. And I always say the same thing to them. Is they'll tell me I was abused as a child and that's a screen memory and all this stuff. And I always say the same thing for 'em. What's your proof? Were you there when this thing was happening? Because I was, and I experienced it. So how are you telling me what I really experienced when you weren't even there in the first place? It's
Yes.
that simple for me anyway. It's just
Yeah, it really is. It really is that simple. You can choose to believe me, or you can choose to not believe me.
correct. So, you used Linda's case of Netflix as a really good example, and as Mary was reading me the article, I mean, I just couldn't have agreed more on that. I was outraged by it, and um, eh, not as not I was outraged what they did with Bud and how they began the show with his ex-wife looking like some kind of enraged troll. Uh, they just loved that. That was pure exploitation. And then the light that they put on Linda was also pure exploitation. And anybody who didn't know anything about the subject matter and watched that show as something that they were trying to familiarize themselves with the subject with would have been so misled. It was completely irresponsible. As irresponsible as Neil Tyson telling people that when you're dead, you're worm food. How does he know that? What's his proof? Have
Right.
you been, it's just wrong, but they'll do it anyway because they'll do anything for money.
Yeah, and the thing about the Netflix documentary about Linda that was so disappointing was, I feel like what it was ultimately reduced to was this very soapy sort of, now we just have these two women who are just picking at each other over a man. I mean, it's sort of like that's what this was reduced to in the end. Napolitano, not just in the documentary, but through the entire, um, you know, decades of her sharing her story, she is mocked. She's been made to be sort of like this um, crazy housewife sort of trope
Yeah.
that so many of these women, um, are fit into this trope. And I contrasted her with, say, someone like Travis Walton, for example. Um, you know, you look at these stories, and on the face of them, one is not more believable than the other. And both of these stories have been, hotly debated, even within the ufological community. But there's always a difference in the tone of the criticism that, say, is leveled at someone like Napolitano versus someone like Travis Walton. Like,
That's true.
whatever the merits of her story are, the female case is not judged on the actual evidence. There's a verdict that gets passed on these women by critics that want to focus on the personal life more than they do on any other qualities. Walton was staged. He was suspected of staging his abduction in order to get out of a forestry contract, and yet his mental health and his basic credibility were never questioned.
No.
And so there's this huge double standard. Um, and I talked as well about Kelly Cahill, who is just sort of another example of a fairly strong contact case. I mean, it was originally celebrated as this sort of holy grail case, considered extremely credible because there were multiple independent witnesses that could corroborate the case. Um, but it ultimately collapsed when, um, the men that brought the story forward refused to stand behind her, which led really to her being discredited and silenced again by the trope of being mentally unstable.
This happens a lot too. It's just the way that the two police officers that saw Linda being taken changed their tune. Changed. They didn't back it up later on. They backed.
Mhm.
They sort of backed away.
Yeah,
And there's
absolutely.
yeah, and they don't focus on the evidence. And a lot of times there's eyewitness testimony, physical evidence. These are the things they should be focusing on, and they immediately go after the personal life. I mean, it's like what they did with Whitley. They tried to say, New York Times said that he had a temporal lobe disorder. Uh, and this in light of all the work that he did, having himself uh, looked at for these very things. He was so concerned about his own mental health. He thought, I need to rule out that I'm not schizophrenic, that I don't have temporal lobe. He had the work done, he had the proof in hand, and yet they still went ahead with an article like that. But if it's a woman, it's worse. At
Yeah,
least that's what I've always seen and noticed.
yeah,
Uh,
that's certainly how it feels as a woman. And again, like I said, I don't want to downplay the trauma and the lack of belief that male experiencers have also suffered from. But I think that it's fair if you take these on a case by case basis, there's still the women still face a huge credibility gap that men don't face, even within this, just if all you're looking at is ufology, there's still a huge credibility gap that
yeah, I,
women are not subject, so that
I
men are
know
not
that.
subject to.
Right. I know this from personal experience because during the 90s, I appeared on national television a great deal with Whitley, sometimes with Roger Lear and with Jacques Vallée and a whole bunch of other people. And I was never really challenged about my story. I was never really, I was given a bad time by people that knew me, people in the industry, because I have a Hollywood career and that was ruined by it, basically. And I had all that. But what listening to you talk, I'm thinking, yeah, nobody really ever gave me a bad time or beat me up on it or went into my personal life and said, well, you did this once or that once, or you have a problem with drugs or whatever. They didn't do any of that ever that I can recall. So,
Right. Yeah, and women, one of my favorite stories that, that I wrote about in the article, or one of my, is this woman. Her name was Elizabeth Clarer, and she's not somebody I think is widely known. She was a South African experiencer from the 1950s who
oh,
had
wow.
had a
I'm not familiar.
yeah
I'm not familiar. Yeah.
she had a very profound contact experience, where she had this long, like, multi-year relationship the with a human intelligence that came from a planet Meton. There was this whole long story that she supposedly she bore a child with this person. This person would come back to see her. She was taken to this planet. She was taken on craft with these people.
Wow.
She has this whole gloriously detailed, as I said, multi-year story. Um, she was obviously mocked and ridiculed. She wrote an autobiography called Beyond the Light Barrier, where she lays out all of these experiences. Um, and I don't think you have to guess what people made of her claim. she she
Especially
was
back
picked
then,
up at the
yeah.
time. Yeah, she was picked up at the time by the South African media. They loved her and they published her stories, but so that they could mock her, not so that they could say, oh, look at these interesting stories. She was obviously an object of ridicule. And in contrast, you have somebody like George Adamski, who was also claiming to have regular meetings with, gorgeous blonde Venusians who take him on trips around the solar system, but he's not laughed off as this, lonely woman of a certain age. He was taken seriously enough to, attain this massive international following.
It's
Um,
true.
he had private audiences with international celebrities. He published best-selling books. Um, you know, he also wrote in this sort of space romance themes, but when he wrote about it, it was treated as this sort of plausible, philosophical space diplomacy
Yeah.
instead of these ravings of a sex-starved middle-aged woman. And she this was despite the fact that she was sort of your ultimate credible witness, and she had this background that should have protected her, as it often protects men who are close encounter witnesses. She was educated at Cambridge. She'd had a highly responsible position with RAF intelligence during the Second World War.
Wow.
um, yeah, she was trained to analyze data, recognize aircraft. So she should have been someone whose claims about what she witnessed should have been taken seriously, just as we are taking seriously the claims of whistleblowers, modern whistleblowers that are former military. We take their claims very seriously because they're seen to have this layer of believability and gravitas because of their credentials. And she had these same credentials and was still a laughing stock just primarily because she was a female.
Wow. Yeah, I'd like to know
Um,
more about her. I mean, um, Betty
she's a
Andreasen
fascinating story.
Betty Andreasen comes to mind, and I read her book a couple of times, and, that was an amazing case.
Yeah, and I think she fared better than women tend to fare. Um, but I mean, just the entire history of female experiencers, it's just case after case after case, example after example after example of women like Napolitano and Cahill and Clara.
Right, right. And talking about personal experience, I would love to hear about yours, not just about, your contact experiences, but, um, which I'm sure our audience would be fascinated to hear. Um, we have a lot of women in this community, which I'm grateful for. Um, it's a good mix. But what you're talking about, you've had personal experience with. Beyond the fact that you've had contact experiences with non-human intelligence, you've also more than likely suffered some rolling eyes and some abuse from coming forward about it.
I've been personally, I've been fairly lucky so far to have been shielded from that. I'm a lifelong experiencer. I'm 52 years old, and so I'm certainly no. This is not new for me to
Yeah,
be an experiencer,
yeah,
but I didn't really fully appreciate the um, the fact that I had been having actual alien contact and that I had been taking aboard craft since childhood. I didn't really begin to unpack that until um, 2020 during the pandemic. I had long COVID and I was very seriously ill. I was,
Boy.
um, yeah, I was bedbound for about 3 years, and just horrible, horrible illness. And as part of that, that kicked off this awakening process. And it was during that illness that I had my first conscious onboard experience with the beings, and that unlocked that was sort of the gateway that began then unlocking this lifetime of experience. And so I have only been talking about my own experiences for a relatively short while, and so I personally have not had it any worse than anybody else. But as a woman, I feel very strongly that it is my I don't necessarily want to use language of battle, right? But this is my discussion now, my conversation now going forward about how women
Right.
are treated as we begin to go through the disclosure process where
Yeah. There's that
people are
word.
talking much more openly about this, much differently about this. And going back to, how we began talking about this, as people want to tell the experiencer story, I want to be part of the people that are making sure that it's told by the right people, and that women are finally given equal footing with male experiencers as we go forward through this process.
That's why we started, or Mary came up with the Mary is really the creator of the Breaking the Silence project. It was her idea to do this in the first place. And for the simple reason that because I've worked in Hollywood and mainstream media for so long, um, and been part of the evolution of being on television and talking about this stuff, and seeing how we were treated and how mainstream media only looked at the exploitation aspects of the subject matter and to make money. That Mary said, "Hey, we have a film studio, we have all the equipment, and you know how to edit and do visual effects. Why don't we let people come forward on camera and tell their stories without any interruption?" And not a narrator, but they actually look at camera. I don't know how many of our shows you've seen, but they look at the camera. We shoot on high-end cameras. We do everything as professionally as we can and let them tell their story
Mhm,
and try to visualize it at the same time because I use my visual effects skills to do that. That's why this was done.
mhm,
Because so many other channels, as you probably are aware of, are very exploitive, and they really don't
mhm.
care about your story or how you tell it as long as it brings them hits and views and and revenue. So that's why we're doing this, and we're only doing it for that reason.
Right.
Um, Talking about your experiences, you had the long COVID. I've had COVID twice. It's really horrible, despite everything. Uh, it damn near killed me one night when I passed out and fell on the floor.
Oh,
Um,
goodness.
yeah, you said that you had a conscious without being regressed or any of that kind of stuff, which I'm starting to be more and more skeptical of the more involved I am in this over the years. And so you had a conscious experience where you could remember everything that was going on, and that sort of was a gateway to opening up the other memories you had going all the way back to childhood. This is
Mhm.
not atypical at all. Sometimes books will do that. Hearing someone else's experience will trigger it, but you had that. Did you get a feeling that at that point that the intelligence, the consciousness wanted you to start remembering those things?
Yes. Yeah, it's been very intentional. And I think like a lot of experiencers, it's been presented to me that you are being given this for a reason. The reason is to remember and then to talk about it, to share. I think that that's pretty common for experiencers to sort of come back with this mandate to share and to talk about their experiences, and I feel like there's been this wave sort of awakenings
Yeah.
over the last handful of years, and so many people had who have been part of these recent awakening waves of awakenings. Really, it's so common for people to come back from these experiences with this sort of directive, the mandate to talk about it. And so I've kind of gone from, hey, this is all fairly new to me, to, okay, well, I'm just going to jump off the deep end and and start talking about this, because this
Right.
is what the beings that have been in communication with, this is what I have been given to do, is to come out and talk about these things and to really help normalize this for experiencers, um, because this is not as rare as people think that it is. Um,
Oh no.
and there are more and more and more people, I think, all the time who are being contacted, and they're having experiences and then realizing that, like me, that this has actually been something that's been going on their whole lives. And it's not just contact experiences. It's anomalous experience in general, because I'm one
Yeah.
of those people that they call a super experiencer or whatever. That I've
I've heard
had.
that before.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I to the point where I actually thought I was crazy at first, because it's like, oh,
That's
there's no
normal.
way. There's no way that I could have experienced all of these different kinds of phenomena, from, ghosts to spontaneous mediumship to, um, I'm one of these people that can't, like, I interfere with electronics. I short things out just by being in the same room with electronics, and I've had precognitive experiences and just this, and
Yeah.
I thought I was crazy. I have to be imagining this, and goodness, now aliens on top of that. But
Yeah. If you
but
think you're crazy, you're not.
I yeah, I actually, the longer I've been in this sort of world and talking to other people, you realize that that is not at all uncommon.
No, it's
Um,
not. You're describing the very things that I know personally. Not to mention
mhm.
the very odd sensation, which has been on the increase lately, of looking into a baby child's eyes at the supermarket and sensing its thoughts, and it's sensing your thoughts, and you start. This is what really makes you start thinking you're crazy. Is as you're walking by people, you can hear them. You can sense them. You can, if you focused on it, you could actually like get into their heads, and then I find myself stopping myself because it's kind of scary because
It's disturbing for sure.
I think we're supposed to be doing it though.
I
So
I don't think any of this is by accident.
no, I don't either. And I really was my own best skeptic, and still am. But I mean, it's the skeptic in me is losing because they make it really
Yeah,
clear that this is real, and they have really significant ways of proving that to you. You want proof? They give it to you. They don't give you the kind of proof.
they absolutely.
Yeah, they're not the kind of proof you can take and show to other people to get them to believe you. But that's not the focus. The focus is you, not your
Mhm.
friend or your someone in your family. It's you. Because if you don't accept that these things are real, then some of the gifts they probably gave us at a very early age when we were just kids will never be fully activated, never be fully used because we don't believe that we have the ability to be telepathic, psychic, just as a couple
Mhm.
of examples. I think we've been so indoctrinated that that indoctrination has turned off our abilities, but they can be turned back on again. So that's my own personal take on it.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I think another one of the things um, that I feel passionately about talking about and normalizing these things is another reason that I want people who aren't experiencers to understand that we will never be able to prove this to people by the standards of proof that people demand, precisely because this is an intimately personal experience. It is about the phenomenon and the experiencer.
That's
And
correct.
like you said, the proof that we get is in the forms of these synchronicities and things that have such profound depth of meaning to us that you tell somebody else, and that we can't provide proof. And I believe that's intentional on the part of the beings too. I think that it has to be one person at a time, I think. and,
Mhm.
and that's why I don't think we're ever really going to have this, UFO landing on the White House lawn
No,
sort of
no,
scenario. I mean, this has been going on for all of human history, and it's been going on at
it
the
has.
rate of one experiencer at a time. And I don't see that. I don't see that changing anytime soon.
What you said to me is exactly, almost identically, what Jacques Vallée said to me in private when I was on a television program with him back in the 90s. And he was so sincere about it, um, that this is about the experiencers. It's not about the elite. It's not about the people in power. It's not about the military. He said it's for you. It's for people like you. It was amazing. It was an amazing moment. I'll never forget. You know,
Yeah.
having this tall guy towering over me with this kindness in his eyes and his gentle way of being, telling me this very honestly. Um, and then Stephen makes a film that I really thank him for, because um, people know what experiencer means now, whereas they
Yes.
didn't before. I would bring that term up, or I'd write about it, and people who aren't into the subject would say, "Well, what's an experiencer?"
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, and Stephen also was very, very kind about making this film, because it was about kindness. It was about
Mhm.
empathy, compassion, and connection. And just some
Right.
people got that message and some people didn't. And as you said, it's got to happen one person at a time. But a whole bunch of one persons at a time probably are thinking a lot more about this subject than they ever did before, because when they sat to that movie, it triggered them. They never realized that the reason they were
Hmm.
fascinated with the subject was because they were involved.
Yeah.
And now they know.
Well, now they know.
And that's
And
part of
I
the process.
hope that that's the beginning of a really wonderful journey for a lot of people. Um,
Me, me too.
and just, maybe what it takes for some people is for a cultural icon like Spielberg to give
It
people
does.
permission,
It
to give
does.
people to give people permission for this to be okay, and that this is something that we can talk about without shame. And
Did you see his Sunday morning interview? The long version of it?
no, I haven't. I
You need to
haven't.
see it. You need to see it, because in the end the person interviewing him was brilliant. He was just brilliant. And the last question he asked him was, I have to ask you this, Stephen. Do you feel that this is real and that they're here on Earth now and this is really happening? And he said, absolutely. The evidence supports it. It's real.
Mhm,
And as you pointed out, someone like him saying that means a lot.
mhm. It really does. It really does. And I think that that may be, I've been kind of, not that this surprises me, because the percentage of people seeing that movie that aren't experiencers is obviously vastly going to outweigh the number of people that are
Oh,
experiencers.
yeah.
But I'm kind of like, oh, let's just, don't get down in the weeds of, oh, was the plot good or was this good or was that good?
Oh,
It's
they
like
are.
this movie is just, I mean, almost every experiencer I've talked to has really felt the weight of this movie, just the importance of this movie.
It was hard to get
Um,
through, especially towards the end with the house and the childhood memories. I mean, I just could not be stoic. I could not
oh,
have
yeah.
any control over my emotions at all. I just came apart. And
Absolutely.
just talking about it now starts to do it to me all over again because immediately I'm there again.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that was a very
Yeah.
kind thing for him to do.
It was. It was a great gift, for experiencers, um, and just talking about recovering memories. I mean, I had, as part of seeing that memory, that brought something else out in my own story,
I'd love to hear it.
um, that the people that, I shared the theater with probably, uh, I gasped loudly enough that I'm sure the everyone in the theater heard, because it was, when you're an experiencer and you have that, you experience these recovery, so how you sort of breadcrumb your way back through, and you regain these memories, and then it's like something just falls into place,
Yeah.
and it's like clink and it just lands. And that happened to me in the theater, um, because when she goes into her childhood bedroom where they've, recreated her childhood home, and she goes into her bedroom, um, and she sees that she has the mobile that's paper
Oh,
cardinals. uh, I immediately, that opened up this tunnel in time, and I went right back to my own childhood bedroom where I had a paper cardinal pinned to the curtains of my childhood bedroom, and it was there the whole time. And I used to lay there at night when the bright lights would come, and I would lay there and stare at this cardinal, this paper construction paper cardinal. And I had this knowing in that moment in the theater that somehow future me had gone back in time and planted that, went to my preschool class, helped me select that cardinal to decorate, to take home, to put on my curtains, so that 50 years later, almost, when I went to the theater to see this movie, I would see the cardinals in that movie, and it would connect everything through time. And it would be, again, it's one of those very, very personal types of proof that we were talking about, that would
yes,
be
that's
proof
it.
to me in that moment that everything I think I understand about being taken by beings, so that I would understand that it was all true in that moment. And I mean, it was just one of the most powerful, profound things
Yeah,
that,
it is.
that
It
that
is.
I
It
have
is.
ever experienced. And when I saw that cardinal, I gasped, because it all just fell into place. And I couldn't have asked for more proof that everything that I think is real is actually real.
I remember
And
you triggered me. You finished, but
no, that's the story. But that was,
I I
so powerful.
when you were talking about that, I saw myself with a pair of scissors cutting a cardinal out of like a cereal box or some kind of box or something. I had I love birds, but I still do, and I watch them all the time. But never saw a cardinal because I lived in San Francisco. We didn't have them, but I remember cutting it out and putting it on my wall. And I'm wondering, right now,
Oh my goodness.
I'm remembering right now how many of the people that are going to watch this, how many others knew that or experienced that. And I don't think I need to ask the question how Spielberg would know about that, but I think he did. One of the people in our community, she got a whole bunch of little cardinals, and she hadn't even seen the movie yet. She said, "I love cardinals," and she started giving them out to everybody. They were little tiny ones like this, and she just thought they meant something very important. So this was I didn't expect that to happen during a show, but now my head hurts a
Oh,
little bit. But I remember cutting
that's
and having a fascination with them, and there's a lot more going on here
yeah,
than I think either one of us even realized.
yeah. Like you said,
Yeah,
how does that happen? How does
I
it
don't know.
happen that it becomes this touchstone? And why a cardinal in the
Yeah,
movie? Why did you pick a cardinal in the movie that
it must be some other reason. It's like it's real hard to process right now. We're doing a recording and everything, but do you feel like not a headache, but there's some kind of pressure in your head when these things happen? Because I do.
yeah, it's a very, very visceral response that,
Yes.
you know, it just like you feel it through your whole body,
Yeah.
which is just another, another thing that really is a passion of mine in terms of talking about being an experiencer is just this the somatic experience or the
Yeah.
somatic side of being an experiencer and how important I believe the human body is um, to being an experiencer. I think that it's so so important that we are human. That there's just something very important about being human. Um,
And to them too.
Absolutely.
That's the whole
Uh,
idea. Did
yeah.
did did you not did you, are you experiencing grace? Have you been experiencing I hate giving
Yes.
them really that name because, I'm sure that's not their real name, but for lack of a better term,
True. Yes.
yeah,
Yes. Yes. So I mean, obviously, my um, the Greys were the ones that I think were I was primarily involved with in the childhood experiences, but the first conscious experience I had also involved Greys. But and here's the thing too, like I until I had the conscious onboard craft experience, I had never had any interest in UFOs really. Like it was just not something that was on my radar at all.
right.
And so I'm having this experience and I'm finding myself I'm on this table and there are these grays around me and they're working on my body and they're scanning me and then all of a sudden this gigantic praying mantis like comes up from the foot of like from down by my feet and I'm like what on is that a what on earth and I never obviously come to find out that it's very much a thing
Yeah,
but
oh, it is, yeah, and I had nothing to do with it for the longest time until recently.
But that's another thing that it's sort of like I could not have made that up in my head. That this had to have been a real experience because then when I come to actually start reading about UFO experiences, listening to experiencer accounts, it's like, oh my goodness, that is actually a thing. Well, and come to find out that my main being team are actually mantids, and I've had a group that have been with me my whole life. Um, and it just, but yeah, so grays and mantids are
Yeah, they're always around together, and
the types that I
yeah,
have had the experiences with.
the tall female that I've been seeing throughout my life is different than the small grays. Her head's larger, her eyes are much bigger, and I think that she could stand for a mantis type. But then more recently, I had an experience where I saw one, and it wasn't exactly an insect, but it did look like more like a mantis.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, I didn't see antennas and that kind of thing, and it wasn't green. It was more of a beigeish, tannish sort of color. But
Yeah,
sometimes there's a lot of interpretation there sometimes too. So and but I saw
yeah,
them.
and I wonder how, it's kind of it's my belief that we are co-creating these experiences because they're primarily consciousness phenomena.
Hmm.
And so, it's kind of like, I mean, maybe there are an infinite number of types of grays because we are sort of co-creating them as we have these experiences. That's something that I think about a lot. It's like how hard and fast and real are these categories? There's obviously
Right.
something to it,
Yeah, because
but
we have bodies evidently, and I've seen fairly
mhm,
good evidence to support that. As
yeah,
terrifying as it is, I mean, that was a very difficult scene to watch in the movie where they were literally torturing that
oh,
living gray. I that just really just tore me apart. I was so glad when that part of the film was over.
it was awful. I thought.
It
I
was
mean,
showing
oh,
humanity at its worst, and it's really good at being that when it's exorbitantly powerful and wealthy and greedy and thinks that, you know, it's the highest thing up in the food chain when it really isn't.
mhm.
It was
Yeah,
just
that was
terrible.
very difficult to
I mean,
watch
that's why he started
before.
the movie with the wrestling match, and it's like, welcome to the planet Earth. This is humans.
Yeah,
But yet there's this very intelligent, kind, cautious, empathetic part of humanity that's always been there. And it seems that these people are the ones who are the most open, so they have these experiences. But it's much more than that. I think this has been going on since before birth. I strongly believe that, and I have really good reasons for
yeah,
that. That this was something that we either pick or we chose to do this, and we could talk about this for hours, you know. But it's hard to emulate in an hour, you know, or even in 2 hours or 3 hours, uh,
yeah,
that, because so much of it is something that only can be told by sharing consciousness, not by using verbal communication, because they're
mhm,
nonverbal.
mhm. Yeah,
So
yeah, and it's like you said, you could talk forever about this, and it's
yeah,
like when you get a bunch of experiencers together, you could just talk for
we'll
hours and
wear
hours and
ourselves
hours.
out. We'll wear ourselves out. So Courtney, we're going to have you back to talk more about uh, the stuff we started talking about towards the end, but I really felt it important to discuss your article, and I really liked the article you wrote um, about we were all experiencers for a minute. I think what was that it for a moment we were all experiencers. I thought that was just a. I mean, you got that movie. There wasn't. I don't know if you saw my comment. I felt like I didn't have to write anything about the film because you said it all for me, and I'm really
Oh,
grateful for that.
yeah.
It was fantastic.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you.
so where do we go from here? Where are you going from here? I mean, you're going to keep up talking about your experiences and writing your wonderful articles and perspectives on the phenomenon as it relates to us as experiencers and as it relates to the public who's not, which is really important. What do you
Yeah.
plan to keep doing?
Um, Honestly, just letting this wild thing unfold. Um, I never planned to be on this journey. I never planned to, like I said, have long COVID and become, you know, I'm better than I was, but I'm essentially, disabled for all intents and purposes from,
Oh, I'm
actually being
sorry.
able to work. Um,
Wow.
again, in any, normal way. But bizarrely, this is something that I have talked about with other experiencers too, about how in these very bizarre ways, it's like our lives are unfolding in ways that is taking more and more of us toward this as a full-time pursuit.
It
Um,
certainly has, it certainly has mine and Mary's. I mean, all we do is work on this channel, write articles, make
yeah,
films about it, interview people, and it's been a really amazing experience, but it's definitely source driven.
yes,
You know,
yes.
I'm not saying it's taken me over. I'm cooperating. I'm agreeing to
It,
it.
it, yeah. So I think like I said, I never expected to be on this journey. I've always wanted to write, um, but I just didn't know. I hadn't found the thing that I was meant to write about, and I think now I have.
Well, you're an
Um,
excellent writer.
and thank you. So yeah, my plan is to just continue to write, and I'm really passionate about um, experiencer support, and talking to other experiencers, reaching out to other experiencers. Like I said, normalizing this, doing
Yes,
everything that I can to just normalize this. And I feel like we're on the cusp of something unprecedented. And
yeah,
I don't think any of us know where this is going. And I'm one of these experiencers that just, I think, feels like we're being called up at this point, called into service for whatever comes along.
I hope to make a better world. I really do. The name of your Substack uh, page is the unidentified felt object. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And
Yes.
I highly recommend, and of course, once this is edited, there will be a link up that you go to Courtney's Substack. It's really special. It really stands out, and it really has a lot of good things to say. Um, and of course, I hope that you would. We have private, non-recorded, completely private, not live support group meetings. Um, and I think we're having another one soon. It would be great if you could come to those. You'll meet a lot of like-minded people. Um,
Oh yeah, I love meeting experiencers. They're
yeah,
like
yeah.
the most wonderful
There's a
people.
woman. There's a and Mary also hosts for women a group, a support group that's private, unrecorded, and we don't charge for it. I know a lot of people, uh, hypnotherapists and stuff, they have support groups on Zoom, but they charge money for it, and we don't believe in that. And we just want to help people, and how you help people is you bring people have these experiences together, regardless of their sex, and you allow them a safe place to talk about this stuff and meet new people and make friends and form community because by God, you sleep better at night. You really do. And that's where the real help,
Absolutely.
that's where the real healing is. So I'll make sure that Mary, if she hasn't already, put you on the list. We have a
Oh, that would
list
be
of people.
wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. And we talk about this stuff just the way you and I have been talking about it right now. So
Yeah, that's
Courtney,
great. It's
Courtney,
important.
I want to thank you for giving us this actually over an hour. But we had a lot to talk about, and I want to thank you for the trigger.
Yes.
Um, I kind of lost it, and when I
That's
go back and
okay. It happens.
when I go back and see it again, and I see myself cutting out that cardinal, it just blows me away. And that maybe that would never have happened if I didn't have you on the show, and I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful to have been able to have this chat with you, and it's wonderful. It's so wonderful. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, and I hope to have more in the future.
Okay. Yes. Take care.